Good morning. Are you awake? I'm not awake. It's about 2 o'clock my time, so I apologize in advance if I'm less than coherent. How many of you have seen Girls? Oh, wow. And Orange? Oh, pardon, sorry, technical. Orange. Oh, less Orange. Interesting. Do you have Netflix here? Yes, okay. Well, you've got 5 seasons to binge watch starting in July, so just trying to get a sense of what you may have seen and what you may have not seen, because I'll reference those shows throughout this morning, and sometimes it's helpful to have seen them, and sometimes not at all. How many of you have tracked down something that you have seen a character on TV wearing? Ah, excellent. Selective group, I like it. I have not. This is just a montage of things that people have tried to track down online. I have the luxury of being able to email another designer if I see something that I like, though I did almost track down the wine glasses on Scandal. They have very strange proportions, and I really, really like them, but then I just asked a props master friend of mine. But if you have tracked down something that you've seen on television, you are part of a very long trend of influences between fashion and costume, and I'm specifically talking about tracking down a costume piece that you thought was interesting, that you really liked or needed to have. The two art forms have a very long-standing love affair with one another. It goes all the way back to the golden age of Hollywood. Warning, you're in for a little bit of a history lesson here. This dress was a sensation back in 1932, sort of at the beginning of films having major impacts. It was designed by the very famous costume designer Adrian, and he designed for MGM's biggest stars. And MGM actually recognized the power of his designs, and they used his clothing as a promotional tool for the studio. They would invite magazines to come in and document his process and document how the gowns were made so that home sewers could copy them for themselves. So this is obviously a long time ago when actually a lot of people sewed their own clothing at home, but the studio recognized the power of his influence, and they leveraged that to promote their projects. And he also ended up going on to design his own line, and he released sewing patterns, and Macy's ended up selling versions of a lot of his gowns as well as other Hollywood gowns of the time. He dressed his stars on screen and off screen. There is a contemporary of Adrian's known as Edith Head, and some of you may be familiar with Edith Head's work. She's a legendary costume designer, and she was nominated for 35 Academy Awards, 8 of which she won. That's actually more nominations than any other woman in Academy history, and it probably helped that she was both brilliant and working at the time that that category was introduced into the Academy Awards. She focused totally on costume design work. She never had her own line, but she dressed almost every major star of her era, both on screen and off screen. She has been quoted as saying, and this is a direct quote, "Couture has copied my things for years, in addition to countless other costume designers claiming that theirs were the original ideas," and it's all part of the business, unfortunately. So broad was her name that, or her influence rather, that she was basically a household name. And even those of us who are not costume design words may recognize her as the inspiration behind Edna Mode in The Incredibles. And her Edna Mode's most famous quote being, "No capes." It's one of my favorites. She's a legend for me, and as well as many other costume designers working today. Again, a bit of a costume history trek this morning. She also went on to design for Alfred Hitchcock, most notably, and did most of his films into the 50s and 60s. These are more of her Oscar-winning films, including The Birds and Audrey Hepburn. And in Sabrina. How many of you have seen Sabrina? It's a classic, both for film and for fashion. And maybe some of you will know something about this image. This image specifically brings me to where the relationship gets a little bit thorny. It was then, it kind of still is to a certain extent. This is Givenchy. This is fashion, capital F fashion, couture. Anybody know where I'm headed with this? Maybe? Almost every fashion person worth their thread knows that this gown is Givenchy and that he famously dressed Audrey Hepburn for Sabrina, along with many of her other films. But, and here's my source site, this comes straight from Wikipedia and a fabulous book on Edith Head if you're looking for a bit of reading. Although Edith Head won an Oscar for Best Costumes for Sabrina, most of Audrey Hepburn's Parisian ensembles were designed by Hubert Givenchy, and they were chosen by Audrey herself. However, pardon me, since the outfits were actually constructed in Edith Head's Paramount Studios costume department and costume shop, a lot of the Academy felt like that was enough of a technicality to nominate Head for the Oscar for this project. And indeed, she refused to be credited alongside Givenchy in the credits of the film, and so she was given the credit for costumes. There are so many issues here between the costume design and fashion, and this sort of highlights it all. And it ripples into contemporary costume design and the crossover with fashion today, and I totally understand why Edith, I'm gonna call her Edith, even though she's totally a legend and probably hashtag dream dinner party guest for me. I'm gonna pretend like we're colleagues. She didn't want to share credit with Mr. Givenchy, and that's stemming from the creative issue with credit. Who should get the credit for the clothes? The beautiful dress that was designed by an amazing designer, or the brilliant costume designer who chose that beautiful dress for that moment to tell the story of this character? Who's the designer of the character or the designer of the dress? And there is so much more that goes into designing the costumes for a television series or for a film than dressing the female star. Since Ms. Head's costume department actually built the clothes, it's very likely, and I do not know this for sure, but it's very likely that she then handled all of the alterations and all of the fittings for Ms. Hepburn, as well as the rest of the principal cast and all of the extras that you see on screen in the whole movie. And Sabrina was a sensation. I still think that these clothes are incredible and amazing, and it is a story about the transformative power of fashion and clothing and costume. And it has some of the best fashion images of all time. I mean, you Google Audrey Hepburn and images from Sabrina come up. So where does that leave us? With a very complicated, sometimes very symbiotic, and sometimes competitive sphere of influence between the two art forms. And so Adrienne and Edith Head may have been the first costume designers to hold incredible influence on screen and off screen, but that is because they were some of the first costume designers ever. And the trend that they set continues to this day. Well, this is not this day, this is 60s. This is Paco Rabanne. This is an incredibly famous costume from an incredibly famous fashion designer. And then in the 80s, and warning, this is not an extensive costume history, so if you want to know more, come find me afterwards. Richard Gere effectively made Armani a household name in the 80s and really launched the beginning of that brand. Mr. Armani now has an IMDb page that cites the actors and projects for whom he's provided clothing, and again, things get a bit tricky. Before I was prepping this talk, I actually thought that Mr. Armani was the designer of the movie, as in the costume designer of the movie American Gigolo. That is not true. The costume designer is Bernadine C. Mann. But Mr. Gere's clothing, almost exclusively by Armani in the film, are quite possibly the most influential and effective brand collaboration and promotion of all time. And there's a rumor going around that Mr. Gere can still walk into Armani store and pull whatever he wants off the racks for free. Don't know if that's true, but that's the legend that has followed him since this film had such a huge impact. And it just goes to show you that what an actor wears on screen is so incredibly powerful for the character, for the story, and for driving sales. Okay, enough costume history. You're still awake, thank God. Just to say this out loud, that was not extensive. My sources are various websites and books about these designers, as well as Wikipedia, and these images are not my own. In case you wonder, I didn't shoot any of these. There will be some later on that I've shot, but these are not those. What about now? I've been citing film references, and that still holds true. Film still has incredible impact on clothing, fashion, costume. But we're now in what I've heard described as, at least in the States, a golden age of television. And sort of from my vantage point at the two shows that I design, TV seems to be having more influence than ever. And I think that there's a few things in play. Americans have a really long-standing love affair with television. I can't speak to internationally, but from what I'm hearing from my travels and people coming up to me saying, I just got Netflix, I've binge-watched the entire series of Orange, not just the first 13 hours, the entire series. It seems to be that that influence is growing. It used to be a family activity. Everyone would gather around their television sets, and the content was all very family-friendly. And then it became sort of must-see TV and the rise of primetime, and what now we call appointment viewing television. And then came the Great American Sitcom, and there's still some influence from this particular batch in this today, because I just heard that Will and Grace is up for a reboot. So we'll see what comes of that. While we weren't even looking, TV became a very integral part of our lives, our social lives, our water cooler conversations, our popular psyche, and even our homes. And now we have streaming and social media. And all of a sudden, we don't have to wait until Thursday night to watch our favorite shows. You can watch them whenever. You can ask these characters to join you in your home for 10 to 13-hour blocks. Then we've got HBO, where it's not TV, it's HBO, and now HBO is streaming. And then, obviously, we've got sort of Netflix, which is changing the game. And that's not my phrase, that's the description of Netflix sort of in the media in the US at the moment. So we invite these characters in whenever we want to see them, and so many people come up to me and say, I've watched 13 episodes, I binged watched this, and it's like we get to know these characters. They become our friends. They're in our living rooms with us or in our dens with us. And for the first time ever, we can now, as an audience, tweet at those people who bring these characters to life, whether it's the actors or the designers behind them. I get tweets from fans all the time wanting to know where they can buy a specific item that they saw one of their favorite characters wearing. And it's not just on girls, it's on Orange is the New Black as well. BuzzFeed emailed me about Marnie's plastic dress within seconds of her appearing on screen in that dress, wanting to know what the story behind it was. Lena tweeted about her personal underwear one day, and I got a media inquiry about it. I didn't answer that one. Then there were Big Boo the Clown, Piper and Alex costume kits in Halloween stores by the time that season 2 had streamed. And there are several apps, I don't know if any of you have them, but they reach out to me. Their entire purpose for being is to track down the things that you see on TV. Everything from clothes to wall color, to handbags, to watches, to all of the things that you see on your screen. And there's a Get the Look feature and a recap, a fashion recap on almost every blog after every episode of Girls airs. Not so much with Orange, mostly with Girls. It is kind of hard for me to say with certainty that my shows have an influence on fashion. I know, that seems crazy. That's what I'm here to talk about this morning, so you would think that it's more of a direct correlation. But I'm not an academic, and I don't necessarily sit down to study that. And I constantly wonder, did I see something in the world? Did I see something that you guys are wearing this morning and get inspired by that and then dress a character like that on television? Or did I see it somewhere and now someone's wearing it and I saw it on TV and so now it looks familiar? I'm not sure where that's coming from. So it's really hard for me to say from an inspiration standpoint which is happening first. But I do know that Madewell released this shirt. We shopped that for season 1 of Girls. Hannah wore it in the series. She wore it in the posters. And then when we were out shopping again, a year and a half later for season 2, there was a pile of those shirts in Madewell. And I like to think that that's not a coincidence. And it was really helpful when that shirt was on sale, when we made a joke about it per script in season 3, and I was able to buy more women's shirts to make into a shirt for the character that Michael Zegan played in the show. And then after Hannah wore her now infamous mesh shirt for an entire episode, there was mesh everywhere in the marketplace. I'm not going to take credit. I don't think it was me, but I think it was inspiring. Everywhere from Forever 21, this is Stella McCartney Adidas, and this is Givenchy. And there's still mesh in the marketplace. And I never bought a mesh thing again after that episode, except for that one mesh thing that we bought for a guest star when we made a joke again about a mesh shirt a couple of seasons later. So I can't necessarily conclude that the show is having an impact, but it certainly does seem like the show is having an impact. There are some things that are a little bit easier to quantify when it comes to influence and inspiration. The clothes on girls got and continue to get a lot of attention. There were hundreds of articles and posts about the show, some of them that were in very well-known and respected publications, and a lot of that coverage was complete disbelief. And I was shocked when someone reached out to me wanting to talk about the look of season 1. During our first week of shooting on season 1, I had gotten major notes on Hannah's look. The point that Judd Apatow and Jenny Connor, our producers, were making was that our audience would never believe that Hannah was this much of a mess if she looked as good as I had tried to make her look. Thank God it was an episode in which she's interviewing for a job, so it was believable that she may have pulled herself together a little bit more for that experience. But after that note, and it's terrifying getting pulled aside by the producers on your second day of shooting, I ran to my truck and I threw out all of the belts, all of the Spanx, all of the high heels, and I asked my team to not iron or steam or press any of Hannah's clothing ever again. And that really set the tone of our show. So yeah, I was really shocked when someone called and wanted to talk about the clothes because they were a pile of wrinkled, thrifted messes. That was the point. And since then, I've tried to really avoid letting the coverage or the feedback. I get some mean comments on the show. That's okay. It's not for everyone. The clothes aren't for everyone. They're for the characters. So I try to not let that coverage influence what I'm doing in the next season, or to influence the look of the characters. Fashion, even though I usually start with fashion imagery or street style imagery when I'm pitching, when I'm interviewing for a show, or when I'm putting together the boards, the inspiration books for the characters, fashion's the last thing on my mind when I'm in the fitting room. That is especially true of my 2 shows, Girls and Orange is the New Black. The girls didn't have jobs when we started the series in our story. They had no jobs, they had no money, they were straight out of college, and while their looks have changed significantly over the 6 seasons that we've shot the show, I really tried to stay true to their circumstances whenever we were putting their closets together. I never wanted them to be stylish. I never wanted them to be trendy. I wanted them to look real. That's the direction that I was getting from our scripts and from our producers and from our writers. And that was the most important thing for me. Not to be fashionable and not to start trends, but to reflect what these characters were really doing. Pardon me, I'm probably out of step with my slides at this point. Oh, maybe not, thank goodness. Then we have the characters of Orange is the New Black, and I don't know how many of you know the premise of the show, but it's about a women's prison. And all of my women come from a lot of different backgrounds, mostly not great backgrounds, and mostly challenged. And my team and I kind of celebrate the times we get to go to a department store and go shopping because it's a lot of thrifting and vintage and very low-end, very cheap clothes. Though I would say that we did have one stylish character on the show, and I use the word stylish very liberally in this context. She was one of our prison administrators, and when I composed her closet for season 1, I had no idea the character, spoiler alert, this is a huge spoiler alert if you haven't watched the show, was embezzling thousands of dollars and would be scripted as driving a Mercedes and wearing Louboutins to her prison job. Who does that? That's crazy. So sometimes working for episodic television can be a bit surprising because I don't know where the character is going. We shot that whole first season at Macy's, and we tailored inexpensive suits to look better and look more expensive. Then by season 3, we had made some adjustments and made her clothing reflect her character circumstances a little bit more. One of the other strange but significant fashion challenges that is part of costume design for non-network or streaming television is the time delay between the shoot dates and the air dates. And these are all images from season 6 of Girls. There are no spoilers here. They are all images that are out in the world due to paparazzi shots or official HBO releases. But if you want a preview, here you go. There's a long time between when we shoot the series and when the series airs. So for example, Girls season 6 is gonna air on February 12th in the US. Spoiler alert, news flash, if you can watch it, that'd be great. We shot the Girls' closets in April of 2016, so almost 10 and a half months ago. We shot the first episode in May, so the clothes from that first episode are gone. Not even a like, maybe there's one on a sale rack somewhere in a weird size kind of gone. They're gone, they're a year old. And it bums me out when I get tweets, or I'm looking forward to tweets about pieces from this coming season, and I have to tweet back that we bought that piece almost a year ago. It bums me out less when I can say that it's a vintage piece, because then it's less frustrating. But the things that were available at retail will be out of the stores. The timing also makes it really hard to have a character be on trend or trendy, because in reality, by the time that the show airs, I'm already a year behind. So that would make me a trend mind reader, which I'm definitely not, and if I were, I would hopefully be making millions doing something very different. And the other thing that it impacts is my ability to borrow clothes for the show or to work with designers. I'm incredibly lucky that there are some young designers in New York, and specifically in Brooklyn, that I've been able to develop relationships through the years, so they understand that while an editorial request might come in for a 72-hour loan, my request comes in and I'm like, hey, can I borrow that thing for 6 months while we shoot the season? They're like, of course, sure. But it makes it challenging to work with major fashion brands who don't have the luxury of loaning something for 6 months. I don't always need it for 6 months, but it's an example. It also means that they can't loan that thing out to the next red carpet event that's happening tomorrow, and the photos will be online by Friday. My show won't air for a year. That's a big disadvantage to borrowing and loaning. So that's another complicating factor. And then there's a consideration that I need to give to the things that I'm using that were current season. So really popular trends from spring of 2016 are already gone. Any notable prints or patterns or silhouettes are things that I give a lot of consideration to when I'm in the fitting room, because I don't necessarily want to date my character to a very specific time. Sure, the show is contemporary. I want it to look contemporary. I want it to feel contemporary. And I do use recognizable pieces. You're probably seeing some of them flash by here. But I don't want anything to scream at the audience, spring 2016. I want my characters to look like themselves. And so I tend to prefer a mix and match strategy. So high and low, new, old, things from their closets that I've had for 3 or 4 years. Anything that will help you see the character and not the clothes. Though I will say, as a little side note, I love a fashion character when that is written into the script. I did a pilot for CBS this time last year called Bull, and it's already been airing, and with network television, it's about 6 weeks between when you shoot something and when you air something. So it's a different parameter. You can loan things a little bit more easily. One of the characters was written as an Instagram street style star who had this penchant for black vintage-inspired dresses. So we had a blast. We went after fashion pieces, capital F fashion. We cleaned out Net-a-Porter, and we had this amazing fitting with an actor who understood what we were doing. She was young, and she really got fashion, and she was willing to do anything like put a necklace on her head as a hat. Sure, fine. We sent those photos out, and our producers loved them, and that was actually the only fitting that I didn't get any notes on, and what's ironic is that the rest of the show was full of suits. One of the other things that has come as a result of these 2 shows being connected to the 2 shows is sort of visibility. Like this morning, I get invited to speak, and I get invited to do collaborations with brands, and it's one of my favorite parts of the job, extracurricular job, kind of. I've done collaborations with several major US brands. You'll see some of them here, Aerie and Sorel, The Gap, TJ Maxx, and Fanny, which is the Fashion Footwear Association of New York. And for these brands, it's an opportunity to leverage my expertise and my connections to these two shows and their fan bases. It does not actually give my collaborations access to the shows or to the content of the shows or the actors or the networks. Those are very separate. What I do for the show is one thing and what I do outside of the show is another. But for me, it's an amazing opportunity to play in another creative arena and to take what I know from the fitting room and apply it in a totally different setting. I have been described as an Uber shopper. I shop more than anyone else I've met except another stylist or costume designer. We also wear test clothing like you would not believe. If something makes it into a costume, it's going to be worn for 14 to 16 hours a day, washed daily, and then turned around and put back on that body. So we really see how things wear, and if it ends up on a Broadway show, it's even more than that. And it's a crazy range of body types and sizes and heights and all of these things. So it's a really wonderful arena for me creatively. It also is a huge source of inspiration because this is the one time where I do get to work with future product. I do get to see what's coming out in the world. And my most successful collaborations have been with brands that I use on screen in my work and that I wear in my life. And a lot of the times I found that it comes up in conversation that the brands have reached out to me specifically because of the range of body sizes and the range of real women that I dress on TV. And that brings up a topic that after 6 years on Girls and 5 years on Orange is the New Black, I still struggle with actually a lot. Girls opened up conversations on fashion, on clothing, and on body image in ways that I never anticipated. That wasn't part of what I was thinking about when we put season 1 together, and it's something that we've tried to just stay true to character going forward. And then Orange broadened those conversations even further, so it introduced introduced issues of race and identity politics and gender to that conversation. And all of those issues are at the core of what I do as a costume designer. How do I take all of those things and express them through clothing for this character? But a character isn't real, and you can't hurt a character's feelings trolling them on the internet. So it's very complicated. And I'm gonna quote my idol, Edith Head, here and say, there's no such thing as a standard size movie star, or woman for that matter. And I don't believe in rules. This is my quote. I don't believe in rules for dressing. There's no perfect way to dress your shape, and there's nothing you should or shouldn't wear, though there is context to consider. I literally don't care what size anyone who comes to my fitting room is. I only care that you told me the size that you really are, because there is nothing worse than standing in a room full of clothes that do not fit. Unless it's Hannah's room, and then it's perfect. Thank you so much for inviting me here this morning. Please tell me that you have millions of questions. I'm Jenn Rogien, and I'm unemployed at the moment, so when I go back to the States, I'll be interviewing. Thank you.